Sonic the Hedgehog, arguably the most recognizable and famous video game character on Earth. I think the only character who might be more recognizable and famous is, of course, his rival Mario. But then after that, like, who else is there that's even close? Mega Man, Ken, Ryu, Master Chief? Those are all pretty big, but I think just about everybody knows who Sonic is. And the other interesting thing about Sonic is he's been that recognizable and been that big since as far back as I can remember. I remember when I was like 6 years old and my parents got me a Sega Genesis. Sonic was one of the first games I got for it. And then I had an N64, so there weren't Sonic games for that. But there's Sonic games on GameCube, Adventure, Adventure 2 Battle, Heroes. There's Sonic games that came out on Xbox, that came out on PlayStation, that came out on PC. It's kind of fascinating because there's basically at least one Sonic game that's come out every year, sometimes multiple games a year. And it's one of those series where like a lot of series have branched out and they've had like Crash Team Racing or something. But Sonic has branched out and continues to branch out into so many things I can't even remember them all. There's like Sonic snowboarding, there's Sonic surfing, there's Sonic car racing, there's Sonic and Mario at the Olympics. And like all these side series also get their own sequels. It's just this kind of bizarre, sprawling empire of games. I don't know the exact count, but I wouldn't be surprised if there are significantly more Sonic games than there are Mario games. Now, part of this might just be that Sega doesn't nearly have the quality control Nintendo does, and that's almost certainly the case. But what makes it even more fascinating is how far beyond video games Sonic has emerged. Like you have new several movies. The only two I can really think about is the OVA anime one, which I really liked. And then obviously there's the American CG one from 2020. There's a whole bunch of different Sonic TV shows. There's The Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog. There's Sonic X. There's a musical spin-off called Sonic Underground. I'm sure there's plenty more that I haven't even thought of. And there's a massive comic book series that has oodles and oodles of deep lore and like different continuities and stuff. It's kind of bizarre. In a lot of ways, I think it's a lot more expansive than even Mario is. In part because Sonic has a personality and talks, unlike Mario. And I feel like Sonic's bigger now than he was even back during the 90s or 80s or whenever the first Sonic games came out. It's really kind of a fascinating pop culture phenomenon. And like I said, with the exception of maybe something like Halo or Mario, I can't really think of anything that's as robust and is going to keep going for the foreseeable future. So why did Sonic become such a success? I kind of feel back in the day, especially, like people complain about how bad FPSs are today and how they're all Call of Duty clones. And a lot of that is true. But if you watch like the AVGN or you even think about the kind of games you played as a kid, a lot of them like were either so hard you couldn't get past the first level, or they were just really like the cheapest, bottom of the barrel, barely programmed like movie tie-in or licensed games. And even the licensed games we have today aren't nearly as bad on average as what they used to be. And so you'd have all this just mass-produced crap. Some of it you could beat in like 20 minutes. Some of it that looked god-awful. Overall, just a lot of stuff that it looked like no one put any kind of time or care into it. But then you get like a couple games like, I can only imagine, because I didn't have an NES, I was too old for that. But I can only imagine you're playing like Karate Kid, you're playing all these shitty NES games, and then you get Super Mario Brothers 2, and you're like, wow, this is amazing. This is a really long game. It's fair. There's parts of it that are hard, but it's like there's a lot of content in this. And it's if you kind of you can do trial and error fairly easily and the game doesn't penalize you too hard for dying and that kind of thing. And the musics were better, the graphics were better. It was a very polished product. And I think you could say that for most of the, at least until we get into the 3D era with Sonic, is you have all these crappy Sega Genesis games, and then along comes Sonic, and it has really good graphics, and it has a great soundtrack, and the gameplay is very fluid, very smooth. I'm terrible at the old school Sonic games, and I sucked at Sonic Generations. But by and large, they're like fair. They don't feel like they're making the game arbitrarily difficult because they were too lazy to add enough content in. I've also heard people say, and in particular some of the analysis, and I won't go too much into Chris Chan when I talk about this, but when they're talking about Sonic is just kind of very simple and easy to understand. And it's something that kind of appeals to a wide range of age groups. You have a very simple good versus evil thing. The character designs I generally think are really good. They're really interesting. I know we can make furry jokes or whatever, but I think they did a good job of anthropomorphizing animals. There's a lot of like really creative stuff for Dr. Eggman, like in terms of the robots he builds, and like there's like the Egg Emperor and like the Egg Battleship and all that kind, the Egg Walker. And even if a lot of it turns out really, really badly, they're at least willing as a series to take some chances. Like, I think Sonic and the Secret Rings might be the worst video game I've ever played. But at least they tried something different. I'll give them credit for that. It was a complete and utter mess, but okay, so they tried to do an Arabian Nights adaptation using Sonic characters. Probably not a good idea. The control system was definitely bad, but at least they put in like the effort to try something different. Like a lot of it, as I said, didn't work out. Sonic Heroes had a lot of problems with it, but it was very different from the other games in the series. They weren't just kind of content to rest on their laurels and just pump the same game out over and over and over again. I mean, they did that with some of the 2D ones a bit, but generally speaking, it is a series that is trying to innovate. And I think in a lot of cases it's gone in the wrong direction, but that's kind of a side thing. So, and you also will have it where it's not afraid to appeal to different age groups. Like I'd argue Sonic Adventure and Adventure 2 Battle, and I guess even Shadow the Hedgehog are targeted at a bit of an older audience. The themes are a bit more mature. It's a bit more kind of dramatic and a bit more plot driven. But then you'll have like, I don't know, something like Sonic Colors, which is a bit more cutesy. So you kind of have the series set up to cover a whole bunch of different bases. It's kind of this very interesting, it's almost like Star Wars or one of these other things that's just grown so far beyond the original concept into its own extended universe. I mean, if there's something you like, there's even like story driven RPGs in Sonic and the Dark Brotherhood, I think. But there's kind of something for just about everybody, and whatever you like, be it 3D or 2D or whatever kind of setting you like, there's something in Sonic for you. Now, that being said, let's talk about our main man, Sonic the Hedgehog. Something I think people forget about when we're talking about Sonic characters is a lot of them are much younger than you'd think about. I mean, this is kind of a thing in everything Japanese where, particularly when it comes to like female characters, because the way I guess fetishes work in Japan or something, you'll have women who look like they're in their 20s, but they'll like artificially put their age as like 14 or 15 or 16 or something, even though it doesn't make any sense. But in this case, the characters are actually, generally speaking, pretty young, and they tend to act somewhat their age. So if you think like Sonic is a bit immature at times, or Tails is, or Amy is, you have to keep in mind, from my understanding, Sonic is either 15 or 16, depending on what game it is. Amy Rose is 12, and Tails is 8. Tails has an IQ of like 300, though, so go figure. And Knuckles, I'm not sure exactly. I think he's older, though. I wouldn't be surprised if he was like 18 or his early 20s, because he does seem more mature and more kind of experienced than the rest of the good guys. And I think at a basic level, most of video games is about wish fulfillment. And that's, I think, just something that a lot of the entertainment industry, in particular when you get into stuff like action movies or video games, it's male wish fulfillment. So I get it that Sonic is a hedgehog and he's not a human, but he's like a teenager who's really clever, who's really strong, who tells people to like screw off, who kind of trolls the boomer, who spent all his money on building weapons that he sells to Israel, which is probably Dr. Eggman's ultimate plan. Wait a minute, that could be it, because he is a military contractor in the Sonic movie. I think we figured it out. Sonic is based in Red Pill. Dr. Eggman is a neocon who's building super weapons to sell to Israel. Or I guess to give to Israel, but that's a side note. But yeah, Sonic's very confident. He's very cool. He always has kind of smart ass things to say. But beyond that, like Sonic's a really good guy, and that's something I always like in a protagonist, particularly kind of like in an anime protagonist, is if they're just at a core really like nice person. And I think the thing you have to keep in mind when we're talking about the term nice guy, and it's kind of cringy, but I might just address it here, is nice guy is used in a couple. I think there's two negative ways it's used in. The first one is when you have someone who's like a gamma male, or like is a classical kind of like beta male in the negative sense, not a bravo, but like an actual beta male, is they pretend to be a nice guy as a way of like beta orbiting a woman in order to try to get her to sleep with them. It's not that he's legitimately a good or kind person. It's just him like being really sleazy. The other use of the term nice guy is from women who made really bad life choices and they're trying to justify their poor life choices by pretending that all genuinely nice men are like psychopaths or something like that. And Sonic's ultimately just a really good guy. I mean, he kind of runs away a lot. He's always all over the place. But if any of his friends are in trouble, he goes and helps them. And he has just so many different bromances with pretty much everybody he meets. Like, I know some people are annoyed by Tails. I always really liked Tails. I always thought Tails was adorable. I like how much he looks up to Sonic. Him and Sonic's bromance to me is like one of the best parts of the series. How they're always like there for each other. How despite Tails being a lot younger, he always like builds stuff to help Sonic out. And he serves as like a really positive role model to try to teach him to be a bit more confident, a bit more assertive. But at the same time, you have, you know, it's kind of like that lad's amnesty thing. I've tried to put in as many like cringy sociosexual hierarchy memes to this as I can to make it a bit funnier. But it's kind of like that lad's amnesty thing where they have like the virgin Chad. And Sonic's kind of like the Chad because he's super strong, he's super cool, everybody looks up to him. And Tails is like the virgin of the relationship because he's like a bit more shy, a bit more reserved, but he's really smart and he always kind of comes up with the plan. And the two of them just really like mesh well together and they work really well together. And I really like that. And then you got Knuckles, and Knuckles is also a huge Chad. And he's kind of like the somewhat distant older brother figure, I guess you could say. And I just kind of I think the dynamic between Knuckles, Tails, and Sonic is just really good. And their personalities kind of like rub off on each other. And just a lot of the kind of the characters in Sonic are very likable. Like Shadow, I think in his own way is likable. I actually kind of like Rouge. I think she's okay. Amy we'll talk about in a minute. I like Amy though. I don't really find her that annoying. I mean, if you were a female hedgehog, wouldn't you have a crush on Sonic? I'm not going to go any further with that one, but just think about it for a minute. So yeah, at a core, I think Sonic is just kind of a really good traditional hero. And like one of the final red pills is there's nothing wrong with tropes or cliches or anything like that. Not every like hero has to be some like super flawed emo like Oh, I'm generally a good guy, but I also rape puppies. I mean, Sonic has some character flaws, like he's obviously very impulsive. He sometimes goes in without thinking, that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, like I said, there's nothing wrong with a super cool, super strong, fast hedgehog who just saves the world. And like they don't, generally speaking, inject any like shitty politics into it. It's just Eggman is a megalomaniacal classic evil genius. Sonic is a classic hero figure, and they just duke it out. And that's basically like it. And I'm kind of happy with that. And they add a bunch more stuff in. There's all the deep lore, etc. Now, kind of the relationship with Dr. Eggman or Robotnik, it's kind of funny because I grew up watching like Sonic Underground and stuff, so I was used to calling him Robotnik. And when the first time I heard Eggman mentioned, I was just like, who the hell is Dr. Eggman? I don't know who that is. But he's a really good foil for Dr. Eggman. Now, I gotta tell you, and I think this makes everything make a lot more sense. Dr. Eggman is a Sigma male. Sonic is an alpha male. He's like a Chad. But Dr. Eggman is a Sigma male. So this is directly from the Sonic Heroes instruction manual. This isn't a joke. Let me just pull this up. Let me just see here. Yeah, in the Sonic Heroes book, guidebook, this is what it says. Dr. Eggman, as his name implies, Dr. Eggman is a doctor that looks like an egg. As well as having an unfeasibly high IQ of 300, Eggman is a romanticist, a feminist, and a self-professed gentleman. Sadly, his tribe's charms are often difficult to spot through the abominable laughter that accompanies his manic declarations of world domination. So, what I'm saying is Dr. Eggman is kind of like a cool version of Elliot Rogers, I guess. Where he's like an incel whose attempts at feminism didn't get him laid because he's so fat. And so he's like trying to make the normies pay by setting up his technocratic fascist dictatorship, the Empire of Eggman, that will take over the world. And that's kind of like what it is. It's like Sonic is like the captain of the no, he's the head of, he's a track runner because it's more of an individualistic thing. So he's the head of the track team, and Dr. Eggman's like the guy with the Coke ball glasses who's like, I don't know, watching hentai or whatever, and Sonic comes over and bullies him. And that just kind of continued into adulthood. And he's just constantly in Sonic's shadow that way. Okay, now I know this is all really cringy, but this is like largely me just trying to make this funny by being cringy. Seriously though, I actually do really like Dr. Eggman as a villain. Particularly, and I always forget his name, the voice actor he had in Sonic Adventure 2 was amazing. All the voice actors in that one were really good. Adventure 2, I think, was like the high point of the Sonic series. They actually had a pretty good, coherent story. All the characters got pretty decent time. A lot of love and care was put into Adventure 2 Battle, from the music to the level design to the wide variety of gameplay. Adventure 2 Battle is one of my all-time favorite games. So we talked about Sonic's bros, his entourage, as you were. We've also talked about his enemy, the Gamma Incel Eggman. But what about his lady? What about Sonic and Amy? So I think it's something to keep in mind in their relationship. Is Amy is really young. Amy is like 12 years old or something, and Sonic is like 16. So that's a really big gap between the two of them. And if you're 16, like, would you really take the declarations of love from like a 12-year-old seriously? So like Amy has a lot of growing up to do. I don't think Sonic's ever been mean to Amy. I don't think he's ever like been like rude to her really. He just kind of runs away when she starts getting kind of like clingy and starts fangirling out over him. So who knows? Like maybe when Amy's older, like maybe when she's 16 and Sonic's like 20, he'll try having a relationship with her. But I think that's kind of something to just keep in mind about the relationship. And maybe that's kind of like weird of me to go into detail about, but this whole video is fucking weird. I've talked about Eggman being an incel who's selling weapons to Israel. But yeah, overall, Sonic is a really good character. Hopefully, at some point, they'll get better quality control on his games. I'd love to see the Adventure series make a comeback, but who knows? If they brought it back, Sega would probably screw it up. It's kind of like why I'm happy there hasn't been a Skies of Arcadia 2, because that's Skies of Arcadia 1 is one of my all-time favorite games, and Sega would probably really, really screw it up at this point if they tried it again. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. This is one of the most requested character profiles of all time. I know I went a bit beyond that and I talked about like Sonic in general, but there's not a ton, like I haven't read the comics, so I don't know a ton of like what the deep lore is. So I just figured I'd maybe I'd talk a bit about Sonic as like a cultural phenomenon and then just do some crap about like Sigma and alpha males. So I hope you enjoyed the video. God bless and keep on running.